Hello, hello, I am Sinner, and I am back with another video, and I've just gotten out the shower. Um, this video is a review of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. Um, First of all, on this copy, this is the Penguins edition of the book, and this particular edition doesn't actually contain all of The Wealth of Nations. I'll see if I can find what's left out and what's here we are. So um, everything I believe in black is included, but you can see everything bold is included, but not the whole book is actually in the Wealth of Nations. Or I think actually, is it the other way around? Expensive justice. Either way, I can't. Yeah, no, everything in bold is included. Yeah, and you know, the argument the book gives as to why some parts were omitted was that um, some of it was, you know, superfluous. It wasn't really like related to Smithsonian economic theory and is outdated. Like, if you want to know what taxes the herring industry had, that's like, is that really relevant? You know, so parts are skipped throughout the whole book, and you can tell when because there will be like three dots where they skip certain segments of the book, um, where you can see, like, for example, here there's three dots at the start of the paragraph, and that means they've skipped a bit. And yeah, overall, it's not a big deal. I thought it was actually quite good because it meant that I actually got through the book quicker than I otherwise would have. This book is only 360 pages long, and I think in if it was unedited, it would be like more like 700. So that's nice. Now, what do I think about Adam Smith? Okay, first of all, the labor theory of value. Let's cover that. Dumb. It's a horrible idea. The idea that the true value of something is based on the amount of labor you put into it is silly. Um, the fact of the matter is obviously you can have something that you put a lot of effort into that's not really worth anything at all. If I put 1,000 hours into making, I don't know, a CS2 clip montage of my best kills in Counter-Strike, that's obviously worth less than working 1,000 hours at McDonald's. And the fact that I might get, like, technically, if I don't know, let's say it gets like 2 views, then the value of that video would monetarily be like what, like 0.0002 dollars or something like that. I think that's fair. I think that makes sense because not everything produced is of equal value. And he also makes the same point when he's like, there's such a thing as productive and unproductive labor, and unproductive labor should be kept to a minimum. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. The value of a thing is relative to the amount of effort you put into it, right? So why is it that being a professional singer is all of a sudden less productive or important or valuable than being I don't know, a bricklayer? You know, it's kind of silly. Um, that being said, I don't actually agree with like the modern economics view of value being subjective. I haven't quite worked out where I land on that. Um, but yeah, that's whatever. For the division of labor, which is another one of his theories, I think this one's kind of a truth nuke. I think it's kind of true. The idea that like you can divide labor in such a way to make it more efficient, and it's just kind of obvious when you look at the state of a modern society versus a not so modern society. The labor, like in a primitive society, labor is completely undivided. You're the baker, the the husbandman, the hunter, the gatherer, the builder, everything. You're everything at once. And then the more complicated and advanced society becomes, the more that labor is divided. And by proxy, the more efficient the labor becomes, because your ability as a jack of all trades but a master of none is going to be obviously lesser than the master of one trade. So the guy whose job it is to lay bricks is going to be really good at laying bricks compared to the guy whose job it's not to lay bricks. And yeah, and that means that like we can be more productive overall. So if everyone has a very specific role and they're very good and efficient at that role, it leads to a net productivity increase. Now, on productive and unproductive labor, it's true and false at the same time. I think there's something to the fact that certain forms of labor, certain industries are more valuable than others, and certain industries are primary and other industries are contingent, or for example, any service-based industry requires there to be a productive industry that exists so that way people can make money in order that they can spend it on services. So if no one's farming, if no one's building, if no one's producing anything of value, then there's going to be no one to buy the McDonald's, right? Because what you're buying when you go to McDonald's is tasty food that's made by someone else. You can make tasty food at home. So it's just the convenience is what you're spending money on. Same with like cleaners or whatever. And it is true that it's kind of a money sink, certain industries. And that gets into like modern industries are kind of cooked, how everything's just service based, restaurants, entertainment, uh, all this sort of stuff. It's bad. It's bad. Like post-industrial societies, I think, are only really surviving because the banks technically own stuff everywhere else. Like the Bank of London will own, there'll be like a London-based mining company that operates out of Saudi Arabia or Africa, and the money ends up back in England because of the fact that the owners have based the mining company in England. But England itself is producing nothing, really. Like, what do they make? What do they make? Ale. Ale, you know, they don't really make a lot of that because they buy it from Belgium now. What else do they make? Coffee. They drink coffee. It's all consumer crap. It's cooked. Um, but yeah. So service-based economies. Yikes. And I actually made a Substack about that while I was reading this book because I was like, damn, that's a truth nuke. That being said, I think it's like not wholly accurate. I think like um, if you have a right theory of value, then industries that are more valuable than others will sort of be downstream from that. Like gambling as an industry isn't valuable. The fact that it's nominally valuable is dumb because it's literally just a way people waste money. It's wasting money. It's not doing anything. Um, And one of the things he talks about, which is true, truth nuke, is that a society is good when you get as many people as possible to be frugal and intelligent investors. People who make their money work for them, even if it's just in a little bit, buying one or two stocks. It's better than buying slop. So that's true. Um, Invisible hand, that's another one. Uh, Dumb idea. Sorry, that's another dumb idea. And he sort of refutes it himself in his own book because the whole invisible hand thing is like everyone's naturally rational and everyone's naturally good. So when people work in their self-interest, it always turns out as like a net benefit for society. And in certain circumstances, obviously that's true. In certain circumstances, you can stand to gain by benefiting everyone else. So if you make, I don't know, a certain product cheaper and better than everyone else, then everyone else benefits because they're paying less for something they need, and you're benefiting because you're getting more customers. Fair enough. But in the same book, he complains about monopolists, you know, manipulating markets in order to, in their own self-interest, access more wealth and block off a particular market. And he's like, oh, this is so bad. Monopolies are so bad. It's like, well, they're acting in their self-interest. Where's the invisible hand now? It seems like the invisible hand only exists when it's convenient and not as like all the time, if you get what I mean. Because people will operate in their self-interest in ways that aren't beneficial and are beneficial. It's not one or the other. Um, and he's sort of silly in pretending that it's always beneficial. And that sort of goes on to um, certain attitudes around regulation. You know, I get it to a certain extent. Like, if something's cheaper elsewhere, why not? To an extent that's true. But on the other hand, being dependent on someone else for something can be dangerous. And that's the problem with free trade. The moment you're dependent on other people for something, then, um, and especially if they're strangers, that's a problem. They can abuse that dependency. So yeah, and a lot of the regulation stuff, it's like, oh well, if we deregulate, everything will naturally just end up better. Um, and yeah, I don't really agree with that. Same with one of the interesting things he does talk about actually is monopolies and colonies which were monopolies. The East India Company. And man, the way he talks about it, it makes me surprised that they even conquered India. Because if it's this, like, in the book, he's complaining about how mismanaged it is, how bad it is, how poor of, like, it's constantly in debt, it's constantly on the verge of bankruptcy. But this is the same company that took over a continent. And like, how does this company, if that's true, if his attitude is true, that's crazy. Because it means that, like, the most irrationally run, barely making it company has magically managed to, take over an entire subcontinent, which is, you know, nuts. Um, I've already talked about how some of his attitudes towards regulation are silly. And I will say the last thing is all the things that people accept, um, not all of it, but a lot of the things he talks about as well is just kind of common sense, and that stuff is just kind of it's true, but it's like, why is this, like, maybe at the time it was revelatory, but not now. Like, hey, don't tax people more than you need to. Maybe as a government you shouldn't try and get into debt. That's not really a good idea. Hey, did you know that the less of a thing there is and the more people want it, the higher the price is? It's like these sorts of supply and demand and some of this sort of stuff is it's like it's common sense now. Maybe at the time it wasn't, but my takeaway from the book, honestly, is that it was kind of a waste of time. It was like everything that was sort of like, with the exception of maybe the division of labor, that theory, which was very well articulated, everything else was kind of just like either common sense or just like gunk. Um, and it was based on dodgy presuppositions, the gunk. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's all I really have to say. Uh, Overall, kind of interesting, kind of not interesting. Uh, but yeah, that's all. I am Sinner. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.